All right, 10 tips for traveling with disease and illness. I'm going to start by introducing myself. My name is Caleigh Haber. I was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis at birth. I had a fairly healthy childhood and teen life. When I went into my late teens and young adulthood, I kind of spiraled into end-stage lung disease. I was listed for my first double lung transplant at 22, got a transplant at 25, had a major medical trauma 8 months later, and went into organ rejection a year and a half after that. In 2018, I received a second double lung transplant and followed by 3 open heart surgeries. I am now a full-time traveler and nomad. I moved into a van with my husband 2 years ago, and we are absolutely loving it. We have traveled all of North America at this point, and we've been to Asia and Europe as well. So I am just going to gather all of this information by my years of travel and share with you guys a little bit about that. So why do I love to travel? My inspiration for traveling is basically the limited time, and that I want to take advantage of my days by doing things that I love with the person I love and with the people I love. I travel to meet new people, to immerse myself in different cultures, understand different cultures, definitely taste new food and see new places and collect memories. One fun memory of my travel was just a year ago when Brian and I were in Moab in Utah, and we were playing a game after a day of hiking, and we get pretty competitive. If you know us, we get pretty competitive. And if you know the name backgammon, it can get pretty competitive as well. And we set a bet with one another that whoever won would actually be able to choose an activity of their choice that we'd both splurge on and go on. And the next morning we went skydiving. And it's one of my favorite memories of travel because it was so out of the blue and just so much fun to do. And a thrill because I never thought I'd be able to do it. My goal of today is to share my best learned practices for how to prepare for going on a trip, how to be prepared while you're on the trip, and how to be prepared when something doesn't go as expected on your trip. So tip number 1, preparation. Many of us have been told that we'd never be able to travel, or we've kind of put that limitation on ourselves due to our health. But with advances in medicine nowadays, and with our care teams, along with organizations like CFRI, travel is becoming more accessible to those of us who want to do that, even with any of our disabilities or illnesses or diseases. So the first thing is to discuss your travel plans with your medical teams ahead of time. This can be really challenging because a lot of us feel the pressure to be perfect when it comes to our medical regimen, and to always put our medical regimen as our top priority. But this really doesn't have to change when we're traveling, and it shouldn't change. Traveling should be done while prioritizing our health, because only by keeping great health can we have the ability to travel. So our medical teams are put in place to actually help us succeed, I know, and to live our best lives possible. They're not only here to maximize the days that we have here on Earth, but they're also here to help us reach all of our goals, whether that is going to Japan or going to our local beach to take in some fresh air. Tip in preparation, ask your care teams what's needed from you while you're away. As patients of chronic illness and organ transplant, many of us have obligations to routine blood work and x-rays. So it's important that we talk to our doctors ahead of time and understand exactly what is expected of us while we're away. Take notes on what's expected of us and when it's expected of us. Then we'll know what we have to do for researching where we can get those tests done and when we need to get those tests done, as well as out-of-pocket expenses and all of those things. Schedule any tests that will be needed while away. To prepare for the required tests, we want to research healthcare's options in our destinations. This will give us an initial idea of the access to healthcare that we have where the tests are required. So the next step would be to contact your insurance plan to confirm coverage. So you want to contact your insurance plan, whether that's the insurance plan you currently have or your traveler's insurance plan. And that will be different depending on domestic and international travel, most likely. Once we contact our providers, they can help us understand what's covered and where those things can be covered. So they can actually give us a list of what our policy covers and what those locations are. From there, we can schedule the test right away. We can wait to schedule tests, or we can call that center to understand more of out-of-pocket expenses, as well as to confirm the test that's needed can be done there. That's a really important step because not everybody has complex care like cystic fibrosis world does. And so we have more, not more important, more kind of specialized testing. So by calling those centers, we can just confirm that they can do those centers before we head there and spend the time to do that while we're on our trip. And Brian and I, we've been living in Mexico for the last few months, and we knew that our traveler's insurance only covers emergency testing, hospitalizations, and medications. So they wouldn't cover any of my routine tests. So that meant that it opened up the doors to where I could actually travel and go to, but it also meant that I was going to have out-of-pocket expenses. So what we did was we printed all of my testing that was required onto a sheet. We went to a local laboratory, gave them the papers. I used Google Translate to talk to the person, and they confirmed that all the tests could be done there. Then I got a quote for how much that was going to cost me out of pocket ahead of time and confirmed that I was going to be comfortable paying that. I went ahead and did the testing, I paid, and then I got those tests back to me on WhatsApp through a message. And then I sent those to my doctors, and I was able to discuss my care plan from there. So, pro tip would be to have Google Translator app fully donated in the language to the place that you're traveling, or to have family and friends as a research to advocate for you if they speak the language or if they know anything about your healthcare. So ordering meds ahead of time. This can be tricky, but it is the most important thing that we can do for ourselves ahead of time. It can make or break a trip. The worst thing to do is to not have all the medications that you need, go to travel, and then spend your time trying to acquire those medications overseas or in different states or somewhere where your insurance isn't going to cover it. So the easiest way to order medications ahead of time is, first off, count all of the medications that you currently have in your supply before you begin ordering. Go ahead and organize the medications into organizers like Medicine Weekly, monthly, whatever the length of time you're traveling. It's best to start by organizing those medications. Then use those organizers, I said, depending on your length of travel. My best tip would be to bring at least 50% more of medications than's needed. That sounds like outrageous. And how are you going to get that medication, for covered by insurance? But it's actually doable. The best practice is to think about the length of a typical hospitalization that you have for yourself, and make sure that you at least pack all of the medications that you need on a typical hospitalization. This will ensure that if you get hospitalized at the end of your trip and wherever you're hospitalized doesn't have access to a certain medication, you have it with you and you can take it yourself. So this includes CGMs, this includes any devices that you have, nasal cannulas, anything that you typically use and you're most comfortable with using, you should bring with you. Most likely, if you travel domestic, these hospitals are going to have all of these things. But I've already been in situations where I've been hospitalized already. I don't know the exact count, but I want to say like 5 or 6 states in the US. And it really does vary what medications are available to me. For example, I went to Hawaii and I was hospitalized, and the pharmacy there wasn't going to be able to gain the medication that I needed by the time that I was going to run out of that medication. At the same time, the mailing service wasn't going to be able to get me to that medication at the time that I needed it. So our last resort was to actually fly one of my friends out with the medication. So she picked it up from a local pharmacy in California, got on the next flight and brought it to me in Hawaii. And this was because it was a life-saving medication and there was no way that I could go without it. I did bring extra medication, but I didn't bring enough. So it's always best to overpack when it comes to medication. Another tip would be to definitely tape your medication organizers, because I've arrived at a location where my organizers have completely dumped out in my bag and there's just pills everywhere, and I'm trying to get those medications back organized, and it takes up time that I really don't want to dedicate to that. A way that you can access more medications is actually through something called a vacation override. This is some information that I wasn't told until recently. You can call your insurance plan, ask for a vacation override, and they usually give you the maximum. They give you coverage for your maximum. So say you have a medication and you can only get a maximum of 30 days at a time. They'll give you 30 more days of that medication. So it is very helpful when traveling on your trip. And be sure to pack emergency medications, including over-the-counter medications and anything that has to do with like migraine, nausea, sleep meds. Pack those in something as well and bring those with you because they're always great to have. My last note would be to research and make a list of any diseases or risks in the place that you're going to. This would be in extreme cases if we're going to Africa or something, and there's risks that we just don't encounter here in the US. Discuss these risks with your team. And if you are going to need any vaccinations before you fly overseas, make sure to schedule those vaccinations in a timely manner so that you're completely vaccinated before you go on your flight and leave. Okay, we're going to go into tip 2. Tip 2, insurance plans. Why to get an insurance plan? It is for peace of mind, financial protection against risks, extra layer of protection, and security. The 3 insurance plans typically covered by travel insurance generally is protection for financial expenses. This means flights, tickets, anything like that. Protection of your well-being, hospitalizations, medications, and protection of your personal items if something gets stolen off of you or you lose a luggage. I'm going to focus solely on the health travelers insurance. So health travelers insurance typically costs between 4 and 10% of your total travel expenses. If you're going on a trip to Europe and you're going to splurge and it's going to be $5,000 for your trip to Europe, that means that just to get travel insurance for that trip, it's going to cost you around $200 to $500 to insure yourself. And when it comes to, there are budget plans as well that I should mention. These cost less, but they cover a lot less. So you really want to read into those policies before you agree to them. And another thing to read into is COVID coverage. I think all of us assume that at this point, we're going to have coverage for COVID medications and hospitalizations, but it varies depending on your policy. So make sure to thoroughly read any policy that you get. Having a once in a lifetime experience in traveling is of course great, but we want to travel and be safe. So that doesn't mean just protecting money and passports. It means really finding the proper medical insurance to fully cover us. And domestic and international trips are going to look really different. So to be aware of, pre-existing conditions can actually change the way that we have coverage. It can limit the number of trips that we're able to take when we're covered. It can limit the length of time that we're allowed to be on those trips for. And it can also just limit what access we have to policies in general, and if policies even cover us. So domestic travel, you want to check the insurance that you have first and foremost to see if they cover whichever state or city that you're going to. And you also want to call them and make sure that they cover everything that you're going to need, everything possible, hospitalizations, x-rays, CT scans, all of that, to make sure that there's no surprises. The next thing is international, and that's more complex. You want to check your insurance to see how long it's going to cover you for. So whether that whatever travel insurance that you're getting, it may not cover you for the entire trip. So you want to check to see if that's a single trip insurance plan or a multi-trip policy, quite different. And you want to consider whether or not you'll need evacuation coverage for your plan. In the worst case scenario, consider your current health and whether you'd be comfortable staying in the country that you're in. So again, look into what they have, what medications they have when it comes to CF and the specialties that you require. And the language, it might be a lot more complex than we think, and it might consider whether we're comfortable staying there. A example of this is when I went to Hawaii in 2016. I was healthy, I was post-transplant, and I had no expectation whatsoever I'd be hospitalized. However, I did get traveler's insurance, and I got the cheapest traveling insurance that I could get because I just wasn't financially in the state to get one that was bigger, and I didn't think I'd need it. And when it came down to it, I was hospitalized, I was emergency vented, and I did have to get emergency evacuation from Hawaii back to California that wasn't covered in my plan. So I had to come up with that money. And examples of the top insurance plans out there today would be Cigna Global, Geo Blue Explorer, and William Russell. And these are simply because they have all of the insurance that we need as complex pre-existing condition people. So hospitalizations, medications, really complex testing, as well as evacuation, medical evacuation, and emergency rescue teams as well. So if we're out there on the river and we just get too dehydrated, we can actually call them and they'll fly people in and get you out from wherever you are. Tip number 3, packing medications and supplies. So I'm going to go over how to pack these medications, how to organize mentally and physically, and where to pack these medications. And I think I've come up with a pretty good system. So the first thing would be to always try to pack all of your medications on your carry-on. That is extremely important. If you're not flying, try to keep them on your backpack with you wherever you're seated in a bus or in the car or wherever you're going. Let's assume at this point that we have all the medications that we need and that are required for our trip, including our emergency medications, over-the-counter stuff, and our 50% more supply medications. So we're going to begin by organizing the medications into weekly organizers, as I said before, and we're going to put our over-the-counter and emergency medications into a separate area themselves, into their own containers. The rest of the medications, we're going to begin to organize by putting them in areas. So I'm going to start at the top of my body. This is just something I do and work my way down. And that's just the easiest way for me. So what I think about is first my brain. Am I going to need any medications for my brain? No. Am I going to need any medications for my lungs? Yes, I'm going to need those. So I'm going to put all of my nebulizers, all of my nasal cannulas, and all of those things in one area, or insulins all in one bag. And even if they're refrigerated stuff or anything like that, just for now, we'll keep them in one area, and this won't take long, so we don't have to be like concerned that anything's gonna thaw out. By putting all of these medications together like this, it's just gonna make the next step really, really efficient for us. So this step would be organizing by organ or disease. So I've just went by organ. Now I'm going to go by disease. So I'm going to visually look at everything that's separated and think disease. And so I'm going to think diabetes. Well, it should already pretty much be separated by pancreas. So I'm going to go into the pancreas area and just check off in my mind everything's there that I'm needed. And by this time, we've already counted everything. So we've counted as we're organizing. We're going to be out for 5 days. That means I'm going to need 1 CGM and 1 extra CGM, and we're going to put it in one area. Things like that. This category, organizing like this and putting them into these categories makes it less overwhelming for me. And I know I am talking pretty fast because there's a lot of information, but I promise I will definitely get these slides and information to you guys so you have it more in depth. Once this is done and everything is packed, yay, now we're going to aim to put it all in our carry-on. So it seems pretty obvious. We want to keep it with us just in case our luggage gets lost or anything gets stolen from the plane. And so what I do is I actually bring my carry-on that I'm going to put my medicine in and put it underneath the seat because I know that's closest to me and nobody's going to steal from behind my feet. So one secret that I learned just this year is that there's actually policies for airlines that permit us to bring one extra bag of medications, including devices and supplies for anything that's needed. So you can bring one personal size bag and one personal size only bag, as well as your other personal bag. This cannot exceed the personal bag size. Otherwise, you'll be charged for a full extra bag, and it can't have any other personal items. If they do decide to check this bag to see if it's medications, then you will be charged for the full bag as well. A tip would be to print out your airline's policy saying that this is okay and call ahead just to make sure. Print your doctor's note deeming all of the medications and devices on it that you're going to bring with you, just in case anybody kind of pushes back on that. And also put any universal plugs in there, because if we're going to need our devices, we're going to need plugs that work, and any charging cords, things like that, that are really, really, really essential. And like I said, you could fill up both of your personal items with medications and then just pack what you'd normally put in a personal item in your luggage. If you're traveling with somebody, you can ask them to use one of their personal size bags to bring medications. It really depends on your length of travel. Traveling to Europe for 5 weeks was meant that we brought a lot of medications. So we used all the bags that we could. And this policy worked pretty smooth. I didn't get questioned at all. I just said, it's a bag of medications. And they said, okay, go ahead. Yeah, it was great. And once you're all packed and once you're all packed, there might be things like your morning or nighttime medications that you need to leave out. So nebulizer machines, anything like that. Just try to keep them in one area if possible. I know usually we kind of have to separate things from refrigerated items and plug wall area item. So keep those in your areas, and then always put post-it notes on like the doorknob of your house when you're walking out, or your car if you're taking a road trip, stuff like that, where you can not miss that post-it note. So you make sure you do not leave anything behind. I've done it so many times, and it is really, really, really such a pain to try to get those things. Spend your time doing that. The next tip would be, this is a checklist. The sorting system that I was talking about, and the carry-ons. Sorry about missing those slides. Tip number 4 would be research medical access and mentally prepare. Research the area or areas you are traveling in to find out which hospital or hospitals you would go to in case of an emergency. So this will take off less stress in the future and ensure that you go to the correct hospital if there is an emergency and you know exactly where you want to go. So questions to ask yourself are, where is the closest local hospital? Where is the closest CF accredited center? Where is the closest transplant center, if that may be something you need to think about? And if you had your choice between centers, so say you're in Ohio and there's Cleveland Clinic and Pittsburgh, which hospital are you going to want to go to? Make that choice up before you leave so that you don't have to make that choice later. Just take the stress off of you as much as possible. And if you're abroad, take into consideration being transferred back to your care center and think about how long that would take when you're traveling. By seeing the whole risk factor of your trip, I know it can be scary and it can put a lot of us like into PTSD, make us think of other things that have gone wrong, but I think it's helpful to force ourselves out of that comfort zone and mentally prepare, because you can really weigh the risk of traveling without the emotional aspect of who you're traveling with and what you're doing, and decide if it's right for you, because it just might not be the right choice. And sadly, we have to sacrifice sometimes and just not put ourselves in positions of going to places that aren't safe for us. One pro tip that I mentioned earlier, or two pro tips, are downloading Google Translate and learning the country's emergency numbers. I'm really bad at remembering to do that, but once I'm there, I usually think of it, and I have to think about how I would be able to call just from my cell phone to gain those emergency contacts. Number 5, documents. Always keep your documents in one folder in one safe place, and always multiply your documents and try to separate them into separate bags when you're traveling. Here are just 2023 requirements for documents. I'll go ahead and send those over when I send the slides over. And again, just try to multiply all of those copies and separate them so that if your bags get stolen, you have multiple copies of these. Contact information, I'll go ahead and send that over as well, but it's always great to have your personal information in case of emergency, your hospital information, doctor information, lists of diseases and conditions, necessary precautions like allergies, or insulin dependence, and your manufacturer contact. When I traveled with Brian, actually my oxygen concentrator broke while we were traveling, and it wouldn't work unless I was plugged in directly to a wall, which meant we couldn't go anywhere. So thankfully we were able to look up the manufacturer contact. We didn't bring it with us. We were able to find it, and they sent it overnight. We got everything, and everything went over smooth, but it's best to just keep that on us now, just in case, so that we don't have to have those lapse in times. Number 7, accommodations. The most simplistic way to think about travel and accommodations is to think about your personal needs and the needs of your travel partner. So if you do need a plug for nebulizers or oxygen or feeding tubes, things like that, it's probably not going to be best to camp. You're probably not going to want to be in a tent with the dirt and risk of infection if you're just out of a transplant. So think about all those things when you're thinking about where you want to stay. Keep in mind a proximity to hospitals, clean water sources and food resources. Think about weather and determine which extra items you may need, like extra jackets so you don't have pneumonia, extra water for dehydration, things like that. And think about the last thing to think about is budget and preference when it comes to accommodations, because when it comes down to it, if you are sick, that's going to be the last thing on your mind, is how nice the place is that you're staying. Number 8, build contingency plans, A, B, and C. While most people don't think about this, we really do have to think about these things to have a successful trip. And again, take the stress off of yourself before you decide to travel. Think about these travel plans with your medical teams. They can help you come up with contingency plans and have a solid plan in place in multiples before you go on your trip. When we went to Alaska, I got a bloodstream infection, and thankfully I knew exactly which hospital I was going to need to go to. They had a CF center, they had a transplant center. There was 2 hospitals I could have gone to, but I knew already which one to go to. I was able to get treated, transferred to my local hospital, and continue treatment all within 1 week. So it was good that we did all of those things ahead of time, and I discussed it with my doctors, so they knew when they got the call, oh, this is Kayla, she's in Alaska, this is what she's doing. And it was all smooth. So don't just think about which common things that you have, like lung infections or DOs. Think about the broader range of things. What are risks in the country you're going to or the city you're going to? Do they have clean water? Do they have insect bite diseases? Try to figure out what you can do to prevent those diseases before you travel. And then if you can actually access the treatment medications before you go there, that would be great. Like in Mexico, there's not always the cleanest water, so there is a chance of getting foodborne illness. I brought medications to treat foodborne illness with me ahead of time, just in case that does happen. So don't assume that you're just going to get your typical infection. And you can also brainstorm with your team things like airlift, evacuation, and stuff. In Alaska, we were pretty remote, so we did have to think about all those things. Tip number 9, it takes a village. Yes, it absolutely does. Talk to your travel partners. Try to be as open as you're comfortable with, and identify one person that you're most comfortable with that you can talk to in case of emergency. Maybe update them before you go on where you keep your emergency contact list and your documents and anything such as an EpiPen, or talk to them about your contingency plans if you are comfortable with them. I traveled to New York to visit my best friend. By the time I reached there, I was already getting off the plane and knew it. Adios. I needed to go to the hospital. And I tried to push through the night, but I was vomiting out of control. Eventually, I woke her up, and she was obviously very understanding, being my best friend growing up with me. Took me to the hospital, stayed with me, knew a lot about my healthcare. And what she didn't know, she had the numbers to my mom and my husband and my brother, and she could just easily call them to get all the information that was needed. And number 10, have fun. The most important part of the trip is to have fun, but don't forget the medical obligations and stay on top of them. And remember to meet new people, see new places, put yourself out of your comfort zone, embrace the culture, and try to push yourself more than you would on the day to day, but recognize when you have to relax, because that balance is so hard to do in everyday life, but especially when we travel. But it's important for longevity of the length of travel and not just lasting 1 or 2 days.